the Hurling Show, brought to you in association with Torpy. Torpy are leading hurling into a new future with Bamboo, a revolutionary hurley created using their unique engineered hurling performance know-how. Already being used by many inter-county players, Torpy's Bamboo is highly sustainable, offers players greater striking distance and a more consistent balance every time, without compromising on natural feel. Check them out on the Torpy website and in the link below, and enter the promo code OurGame to get yourself 10% off. Hello and welcome to the Hurling Show. Once again, it's myself, Shane Stapleton, and Michael Verney alongside me. One thing we noticed straight away, we're sponsored by Bamboo, and as I said, get 10% off with the promo code OurGame. Use all caps at the moment, and check out the link to the website underneath the video. But Gearóid Hegarty, 5 Clare hurlers, I think Michael Kiely of Waterford, and Gearóid Hegarty, as you can see on the front of the Indo there, holding the Bamboo stick there. So plenty of people using it. I also used it to reenact that brilliant Kieran Doyle point for Westmeath last week. So plenty of people getting into it now.
It obviously gave you the Midas touch as well, because I don't think in a month of Sundays with any other stick would you have been able to do that. But they're really unmistakable as well with the four strikes too. Lovely sticks. Another thing I couldn't help but noticing with that picture is, like, Fintan Burke is an absolute ringer for Caterheely that used to play with Laois. Same kind of left hand. See him there at number 7 on the right hand side. He's the same gait. He has the same facial expression. He's the same build and everything. Be interested to hear what people think. What are some of the other great GA lookalikes? But I'll definitely be sending it on to Cater after the show. It looks the absolute cut of him.
It actually is. It actually is. And a fair hurler that Cater is as well, some competitor. There's so many brilliant games coming this weekend. Like, we've had a couple of rounds of hurling and everyone kind of feels like, the sky is falling down and all that kind of stuff. And it has been a little bit frustrating watching hurling. But I think the referees are getting used to new rules, so are players. Players have only had a few weeks back, all that kind of stuff. Even like any of the club players out there, a couple of weeks of training, it's very hard to get going again, just from a standing start. But some of the big games coming this weekend: Tip-Galway, Dublin, Antrim, Cork, Westmeath, Waterford, Limerick, Kilkenny, Wexford, Laois against Clare. There's plenty of other games, and we're going to go through all the tiers as well, but I won't bore you by naming them all just at the very, very start. But we'll start off with a game that's probably reflective of the rivalry of the decade, or the last 5 or 6 years anyway. Tipperary against Galway. So coming into the game, Tipperary, do you know what? I was just going through the scoring stats for Tipperary so far in the 2 league games, and it was a draw against Cork and a draw against Limerick. And Tipperary scored 20 points in the first game, 22 points in the second game. But 14 of the points that they've scored 24 of the points that they've scored so far are placed balls. 57% of Tipperary scores are from placed balls. And I have to say, as a Tipperary man, considering the firepower that the Premier always have, it's a little bit unusual to see it. Now, at the other end, Galway, their stats are a little bit skewed by scoring 5-34 against Westmeath, just 12 from placed balls. And then 15 out of 26 were from placed balls against Limerick. So just 36% from placed balls compared with 57%. Now, this is the rivalry of the decade, or the last number of years. We will have a look at that a little bit more. But for Tipperary, no goals, 57% from placed balls. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you know the quality attackers that they have and the risks they have up front and the goal threat they've generally had over, really probably since Sheedy took charge in 2008, they've always gone for goals. They didn't threaten the goal against Cork. I don't know, is it worrying, or is it a case of they have to learn so quickly and have to integrate some new guys and try and find this perfect blend that, and it's probably the right way. They're probably starting at the back and trying to make sure they're as secure as possible from the back. They have a new goalie in, Barry Hogan, who seems to suit this style maybe a bit more, where they're going to work the ball even more and they're not going to maybe strike the ball as long to a forward line that maybe down a couple of players if they're dragging a lot of other players back. But I think Sheedy is starting at the back, trying to get as solid at the back as possible. Didn't really cough up too many obvious goal chances against Limerick. They coughed up a couple against Cork, but to be fair, Cork had created about 10 the week before against Waterford and had nailed 5 and absolutely cut Waterford open. Were Tip cut open properly like that at any stage last weekend? Maybe at the very start with that Jack O'Connor chance. But I think he's trying to make them as solid as possible at the back. And I think by round 5 and coming into the championship, like the bluntness in attack would be long gone. Like, they've too much attack and firepower up there, and with Seamus Callan probably coming back to the edge of the square, I would expect a big goal threat to come back. Well, I think he's just trying to play it safe now. Like, you can't have everything. You can't have everything within a couple of weeks. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing what he's doing now, even though alarm bells might be ringing. Like what do you think? Is there much talk in Tip about we don't threaten the goal at the moment? Where are all our goals gone? Where are all these great attacking plays gone?
Yeah, I think everyone in Tip would notice this. I mean, just 11 points from play in 2 games from your forward line. You're looking at Ronan Maher and maybe Barry Heffernan probably scoring more than some of the other forwards in the couple of games, which is very alarming. But when Tip are struggling, it's generally the battlers that actually tend to play quite well. Go back to 2018 when Tipperary were a little bit all over the place, and you remember losing down in Limerick, and it's the likes of Billy McCarthy, a real battling player that can win his own ball. That's a guy that's standing out, and hopefully he'll be back in the blue and gold later in the year. Hopefully he recovers from injury well. Like Dan McCormick, he's the one that's stood out a lot in games in recent times when Tipperary have struggled. But when the team's on the front foot, then those players are talked about less, and it's about, Bubbles O'Dwyer's throwing it over the bar, Seamus Callan, and so on and so forth. But I suppose most people in Tipperary are thinking, well, this is based on this is my own opinion really, that, yeah, like you're saying, get the defence right and then build from there. Stop having teams cutting through you and making you look like you're a bit of an older team or lacking pace or a combination of both of those things. So I think there will be patience. Getting a draw against Limerick when... See, the thing is that the talk is that, maybe Limerick are getting flogged a little bit more than Tipperary are at the moment in time. So did Tipperary put more stock into that game, and did Tipperary have closer to that first 15? What do you think? Do you think Limerick are overly worried about these games at the moment? And we'll talk about Limerick-Waterford a little bit later on. But do you think the likes of Limerick put in more into that game? And actually Cork as well. Do you think Cork really targeted beating Tipperary last weekend?
I'd say Cork probably would have. I don't think Limerick so much. John Kiely was probably poor mouthing a bit after when he said, that Tip had a bit more training done or had a couple of more weeks done. I'm not too sure how that would be possible really, to be honest with you. But Tip definitely would have been targeting getting a result against Limerick and not shipping a 4 or 5 point defeat again. While they could have won the game, at least they didn't lose it. Cork definitely would have been aiming for a big result against Tip the other night. And in fairness, Tip hit a lot of wides, but Cork definitely had, more of an attacking threat, at least created a couple of goal-scoring chances. So I think Sheedy would be happy enough to have gotten the 2 results. Like, remember in 19, when Tip came back from the training holiday, weren't going particularly well before that. All of a sudden, absolutely blitz Cork, put up this ridiculous score. I think Jason Ford got 113 the same night. The same day, and then all of a sudden it was a different Tip coming into championship, and they were just able to maintain that into championship. I think that's the kind of recipe they're looking for this year. They're probably unsure of 3 or 4 places, unsure of how to find that balance between all the risky players and getting mobility and speed, particularly around that middle kind of third. So I think Tipperary will be a different prospect towards the end of the league, but I do expect a different type of a game when they meet Galway. We've invariably seen, some of the great games that last 11 years, I'd say. Like, everybody talks about Tip stopping the drive for 5 in 2010. If Lar Corber hadn't put over that point at the end, that beautiful point where he wheels back around against the quarter-final, they wouldn't have won that game. That epic qualifier in 14 with the 7 goals. I think Tip were a nice bit down that day. And then, 15, 16 and 17, those absolute barn-burning games where there was only a point in it each of those days. And even last year's quarter-final, when people were talking about, the absence of goals and how hurling had changed, you knew within 5 minutes of that match, okay, this is just Tip and Galway as normal. The league game last year was the same. There was 6 goals between them. In their last 6 championship meetings, they've shared 26 goals. So you'd be expecting things to go, not essentially to go like real open game, but you would expect it to go back to normal somewhat when the two of these play. That just seems to be always the way when they play.
Who are the teams where tactics go out the window, or at least it feels like tactics go out the window? There's always a certain amount of them, but where this whole cliche of a game takes on a life of its own, which I do agree with. I think most people play in matches, you're like, well, our best laid plans are gone out the window, and as Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. I think Tip Cork games can be like that, Tip Kilkenny games, Tip Galway. Is the bottom line that Tip tend to be in those sort of games? And I'm not even saying it as a way of saying, hey, Tip, we're great or whatever. But are Tip a bottom line in that? Or can Cork and Limerick, a couple of their games have definitely gone that way too?
Yeah, I remember all the Kilkenny boys will tell you that they had unbelievable plans going out to play Cork in 06, and they just went out the window straight away. They were all supposed to stick to their men and try to stick to their area, and all of a sudden the ball broke around the half-hour line and there's about 6 Kilkenny lads in on top of one lad. And that's what happens. You've played in games like that as well, where you have ideas. I remember we played Dublin in, I think it was 2011, in Leinster semi-final, and I was marking Paul Ryan the same day, and I was going to try and I wanted to get in a good bit of ball if I could, and try to hurl him and get a good bit of ball into our attack and try and get on ball. All of a sudden he won the first ball, and I was like, all right, that's grand. I just have to change this completely. He's going to get on more ball than me and going to do more damage. So you just kind of flicked the old miserable kind of button and decided that I actually didn't feel the weight of the ball in my hand the whole day. And many people will tell you that that's one of the best games I ever played for Offaly. So, you know what I mean? Sometimes your plans can just go completely out the window. And that's kind of what we're hoping for this weekend. I know I was chatting to Micheál Donoghue yesterday. He was obviously, no one could probably be better placed to talk about that rivalry. He was with Tip in 14 and 15 and was on the wrong side, was on the right side in 14 with Tip, on the wrong side in 15. Then he was with Galway in 16 when Bubbles came on and got that goal, and he was on the wrong side, and then he was on the right side when Canning put over that epic point in 17. He was just saying, like, we talk about game plans, we talk about this and this. I said it literally none of it mattered once the game started. Everything went out the window. We'd reflect after, and it'd be like, nothing we planned basically came to fruition. It was a case of you attack, we attack, you attack, we attack, and whoever, was basically a shootout, and whoever was, better in front of the post that day would win. And I think that's what we love, and I think that's what people want now, and they're screaming for it now. So, like, 1:30 on Saturday, this could, like, a big barn burning game could set up another maybe epic weekend. So hopefully this is kind of like the acid test maybe of where hurling is at the moment, and you'd be hoping that it would just revert to type and we get one of those great games that we've gotten for the last 10 or 11 years. And
there's so many names that kind of stick. Well, when I try and think of those iconic moments, Joe Canning's point you've mentioned, of course, and the big smiley photograph as well. That's the sort of photograph that gets sent to me when Galway people are trying to drive the boot in, and to be honest, it's pretty effective. It's kind of a funny picture, but obviously a brilliant score as well. Shane Maloney 2015, that stands out. Of that game in 2014 down in Thurles, when, like, that was a spark that set Tipperary going that season, much like 2010 that you already mentioned, Lara Corbett wheeling around for the point. But actually it was a Lara Corbett point in, like, Callan scored a hat-trick, but it was a Corbett point in 2014. He hadn't poked the ball, I think, for an hour, but then got these two unbelievable scores around the hour mark, one from around the 45 over the shoulder, and it was just an absolute beauty, and the crowd got going, and from there on Tipperary kind of took over. And then there's, of course, the big shoulders. So Pádraig Maher on Joe Canning, then Grode McInerney on Pádraig Maher a year after. There are a lot of big moments. Aidan Hart's goal then last year. Like, it is a great rivalry. Whatever it is, it's heart on the sleeve stuff. Yeah, no, it's great stuff. Yeah, you remember kind of all those big hits as well. Probably no coincidence that all those games have taken place in Croke Park, and the 14 game was in Thurles, and obviously Saturday's game is in Thurles. Like, it's not like playing a game in Pearse Stadium. It's a wide open confines. It allow you to play that kind of style a bit more. And in fairness, Galway went kind of 15-15 against Limerick the other day, whereas even when they played Tip last year, Pádraig Mannion was probably sitting back as a sweeper. So I'd say Galway will definitely maybe be more proactive with their tactics than they were last year. Tip, it's going to be interesting to see what Tip do. Éanna Murphy went long with every puck out last week for Galway, whereas Patrick Collins, I think he hit one puck out long for Cork because Tip basically conceded the puck out. So it'll be interesting to see, do
do Tip continue to do that and let the cornerbacks have the ball, or will it turn into a kind of a longer style game that we're used to? It's a great game to set up the weekend, and it'd be great to see kind of one of those open thrillers that we've gotten used to. Just a comment in, Shane, from Hello World on YouTube, and this is very appropriate. Just we were talking about the lookalike with Fintan Burke and Catter Healy. It just said same quads and all, and it's literally the exact same body type and shape as Catter. So yeah, I'm sure he'll enjoy that one when I send it to him later.
Yeah, I'm having a quick look over the notes that I made during Galway against Tipperary last year. 81 scoring chances in the game. So, I mean, that's kind of typical of these two teams. Galway won that second half by 6 points. Cathal Mannion was very good in that game, and he's a player who looks like he's on fire. We keep saying it. He came off against Limerick early, 22 or 3 minutes in the All-Ireland semi-final last year, and how important was that in how things panned out. Now, this weekend, it'll be interesting to see how the teams shuffle their decks, because they've had a couple of games now. The likes of Dan McCormick wasn't played last weekend, and Sheedy said after the Cork game, we have to be conscious of guys who put in serious shifts one week after the next, and for week 3 we'll have to freshen things up again. So Tipperary have 2 draws, so I mean, points wise it's as good as if they've won one game. So after 3 games, do you want to have 4 points? Do they really need a victory here? Does it matter that much? I think as long as you're not getting hammered, nobody's going to mind too much if you lose narrowly and maybe you see something from a player or two. Because I actually do want to talk about Tipperary and probably the lack of blooding players. But just first of all, what do you make in terms of the importance of getting a result here?
Yeah, it is important, but there's a fine balance between getting a result and keeping momentum, and not giving a lad an extra 5 or 10 minutes that could potentially leave him out for a month. So I think in fairness it was wise probably with Dan McCormick maybe leaving him off. Alan Flynn kind of didn't really look himself as well. When you put in that sort of big shift in around the middle of the pitch, kind of hard enough to back it up the week before, particularly when it's not like they've 10 or 15 games under their belt already this year. They're coming in quite cold. I couldn't imagine how sore you'd be after an inter-county game, having not played one in the guts of 5 or 6 months. Just the kind of question or topic you were posing there, just interesting. You were down in Tipperary last weekend. You were back home for the weekend, and you were down in Thurles Saturday. What's the kind of vibe in Tip as regards the blending of the young fellas in, or the lack of blending of these under 20 All-Ireland winners and under 21 All-Ireland winners? What do people think? Do people generally think a lot of them are ready, or that they're not ready, or is there still a lot of faith placed with the older players? What's that kind of mood like down there?
I think people are a little bit unsure. What's funny? I'm down home for the weekend, but you just don't run into that many people just with the way things are. Obviously, nobody at the match, and people aren't mixing all that much. They are a little bit more, especially in outdoors, but not quite as much. But people would. I think it's a kind of the proof is in the pudding. You need to see it. So players probably need to be blooded a little bit more. Most people will probably be encouraged with how Brian O'Mara did against Limerick, but of course he broke his arm or fractured his arm at the end, so he's out for the rest of the league. They probably would have liked to see, after settling into the first game okay, could he then kick on and probably do a little bit more with the ball in the next game, or how it would have developed. I think physically the likes of Paddy Cadell looks like he's certainly ready to go in there, so maybe he'll get his chance this weekend. Of course the teams haven't been announced when we're talking here at the moment, but just to even talk about it broadly, the Tipperary teams that won the All-Ireland under 21 and under 20 titles under Liam Cahill in 2018 and 2019. Now look at the players that were absolutely crucial to that. At the scoring end of the field, Ger Brown won the under 21 player of the year in 2018. He's no longer on the panel. Jerome Cahill, he was a key part of the 2019 team. He's no longer on the panel. Both of these guys are pacey guys, and the topic keeps coming up about where is the pace in Tipperary. So they're not in the team. The centre backs in the two teams, Paddy Cadell and Robert Byrne. Now both are on the panel and both were on the bench the last day, and maybe the two of them will see more game time as we go along. They probably have a little bit more to do in terms of convincing the public, but maybe the raw materials are there. Sheedy should know Robert Byrne very, very well because he's a Portrue player, and then Paddy Cadell. maybe since the Cork game in the league last year, he probably hasn't had that much game time. So those are the main guys, and they haven't been brought through just yet. Then there's the likes of Billy Seymour, who was shooting the lights out for the under-20s a couple of years ago. Jake Morris, of course, has come through. Cian Darcy's gotten a couple of goals off the bench, but maybe not that many have come through. The flip side then is look at that Cork team, or those Cork teams that Tipperary were playing. So those Tipperary players haven't had too many starts in Championship. Look at going back the last 3 or 4 years. Gibbon, there's a couple more. Remember those 5 players that were there in 2017 that were thrown into the Cork team, for example.
Yeah, is that not necessity though, Shane?
It is, yeah, but that
in many ways.
But Tip's lack of necessity, or perceived lack of necessity, is possibly holding back the next generation, and meaning that there is more of a transition period required now, or maybe a little bit of pain to be suffered now before the transition is complete.
Yeah, I'd say a little bit of pain, just because I think the quality of players that they're trying to usurp is a lot higher.
Yeah.
Like look at the quality of Tip players they're trying to get basically take the places of. You know, Bonner has 3 All-Irelands, Brendan Matter has 3 All-Irelands, Paddy Matter has 3 All-Irelands and 6 All-Stars, Shane Callan has 3 All-Irelands and a hurler of the year and nominated 3 or 4 times. You know, Noel McGrath has a couple of All-Stars, John McGrath the same, has probably 2 All-Irelands. So the quality of player I think they're trying to place is much higher, whereas Cork needed to shake things up a bit. They probably needed to accelerate the new faces into the fold. So like I don't necessarily think Sheedy is going about it the wrong way. I think it's a difficult kind of transition, but they're getting bits and pieces of time. There's going to be a bit of pain, but when they are ready, probably next couple of years, when a lot of those elder statesmen probably exit stage left and head off into the sunset, having had great county careers, there will be 7, 8, 9, 10 guys that have had decent bits of experience and will be much more mature and probably ready to be. They're going to have to be mainstays of the team. Then they're going to have to be the central figures of them. So it's a kind of a difficult balance. You have to weigh up, how good are the guys that they're going to be replacing. In Tipperary, the guys that they're going to be replacing are top class game players that we're going to talk about as some of the best players of that decade, probably from 10 to 19 and onwards even.
Which is interesting though, that it feels like Galway are a little bit further along the line in terms of transitioning players in. I mean, it remains to be seen how Evan Nyland beds into the team, but like what we saw last year looked good, and that goes back all the way to the Tip match in the league, and then when he came on later in the Championship, he looked really good. He settled in very well this season as well. Fintan Burke, we've obviously talked about at length there, and the likes of Brian Concannon is probably in year 3, if not year 4 at this stage, and he's become a mainstay. So it feels like their transition is a little bit further down the line, while also taking into account that if you take out 2018, when Dublin shocked Galway and knocked them out of the Leinster Championship down in Parnell Park, they probably have been the most consistent team over the last 6-7 years.
Yeah, they don't generally put in, they haven't generally put in bad years or bad displays. They've generally been nearly where they should always have been. Semi-final last year, probably not a freak result, but a freak nearly series of results knocked them out in 19, final in 18, and obviously won it in 17. A lot of those players that we're talking about, would have seen bits of game time in 18 and 19, would have been gradually introduced, and now all of a sudden it all looks a bit more seamless. But like it does take a couple of years generally, unless you're an absolutely outstanding player. And when you're trying to break in, like somebody trying to break into the Limerick team at the moment, unless you're an unbelievable talent and you're coming in at 19 or 20, it's going to take time. Like you saw, Cathal O'Neill probably had a tough time the other day. Brian O'Grady probably had a tough time. A couple of flashes of brilliance, but a tough time as well. It's difficult when you're coming in trying to replace guys that have really nailed down places over the last while. But that kind of thing with Tipperary and kind of marrying that balance is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. I'd have a good bit of faith in what they'll be like come Championship time. Whether they can win All-Ireland to beat Limerick is another story, but I think they'll definitely have a good balance, and I think the attacking threat that we're so used to, I think Sheedy knows what he's going to get in attack. I think you should know what you're going to get generally in attack with Tipperary, as long as you're not playing that aimless long ball that we saw for a couple of years, maybe in 18 and maybe at 17 at times. If they're playing the right side of the ball in and Eamon O'Shea has them creating that space up front, we know what we're going to get. At the back, maybe not as reliable or consistent. And I think that's the pillar that he's going for first.
Yeah, I wonder will Shane O'Neill persist with Sean Loftus at cornerback and Fitzpatrick? Is he going to try out other guys as well? Will we see Dahi Burke fairly soon? Davy Burke, he's going to be out. He's a minor hamstring injury. He's going to be probably missing for the rest of the league. And that is the case for any player. If you get a hamstring injury, you're going to miss 3 or 4 weeks and God knows how many games with it. Galway, like you would have thought before the league, Tipperary and Galway is possibly, this is the chase and pack. This is the couple of bridesmaids here that are looking to see who's even chief bridesmaid behind Limerick at the moment. But Galway have done what Tipperary haven't been able to do in league or championship in the last couple of years, and put it up to Limerick and beat them by 6 points, holding them to 117. Like 18 scores for that Limerick team. I don't care who they're starting. They obviously did try out a couple of younger players, as you're saying, very talented players. But like that's a statement of intent.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. They went, as I said, they went toe-to-toe with Limerick. Nobody has really gone toe-to-toe with them in recent years. They've all tried different things. Galway went toe-to-toe with them. And in fairness, they were able to match them. And in many areas, they were able to overpower them. There weren't too many Limerick guys that came away having won their battle the other day. So Galway have laid some foundations for later on in the year. And just even to see, I'm not sure we'll go into the Limerick-Waterford thing now, just to see John Kiely even been, unnerved, I would say, and unnerved enough maybe to come out with the comments that he came out with after. And I believe Dermot Burns has gotten a 1-match ban as well for his kind of incident with Jason Flynn after the ball. So all of a sudden, Limerick don't look so unbeatable anymore. So I wonder, has they given Sheedy and Tip in particular a good bit of hope, along with the hope that that they got a good result against Limerick first time out. So it's funny, like the narrative and the story can change very, very quickly based on a result. But it wasn't the 6 points by Galway. That was comprehensive. They won most of the positions on the field, and I think that'll give them great heart going forward. Yeah,
like if it only takes a spark to get your season going, maybe sometimes it only takes the negativity of 1 or 2 bad results, or even Dermot Burns getting a suspension, or John Kiely coming out talking about simulation from Galway, and there was throughout the game there seems to be a nice bit of niggle going on between John Kiely and Shane O'Neill with reference to the simulation. Now look, everyone has kind of made up at this stage, and John Kiely issued a retraction.
Have they all really?
Look, I mean, on the face of it, this is the optics. And I just, Kiely came out to talk about the simulation, all that, and he was quite upset. And obviously the officiating of the game, the rules being brought in more so than the officiating of that particular game. But what he said in relation to talking about simulation was, at the time I was of the opinion that I had seen an incident that I wasn't happy with. It was late in the game and very much to the forefront of my thoughts after the game. But over the last 2 days, I've been going through the video footage of the game and I've had a very clear sight of those incidents I referred to. The bottom line is that what I thought I had seen was absolutely not the case. I wish to wholeheartedly retract those comments with regard to Galway and apologise for them. It's important that I set the record straight now that I'm certain that what I saw was not what I believed what I had seen. Now, are you buying that?
Well, I tell you what, in fairness to John Kiely, how many times has a manager been asked, did you see this incident or see that incident? Oh, I didn't see it, didn't have clear sight of it. In fairness to him, he fairly said that he's, whatever he thought he saw, he fairly gave his opinions on it. It was funny when the comments came out, I was thinking, Jesus, brilliant, this is a nice bit of needle. There was a bit of needle in the game on Sunday. There's a narrative going around Galway. I was in chatting to Cyril Farrell the other day, and he was saying that there was talk around Galway that Galway were bullied by Limerick in last year's semi-final, and there was no way that they were going to let that happen the last day. So there was a nice bit of needle between them. All of a sudden, a manager sees something or perceives to see something. We're the vultures that we are. We interviewed him straight after, right in the heat of the moment, and he comes out with those comments. On reflection, he retracts those statements. I kind of loved the statements because I didn't think they were necessarily true, and far from it. But it's just that it creates more needle between them. It's the sort of thing that would be pasted on a dressing room wall. He's retracted his statements. I still think the Galway lads are going to think that he thinks there's a fair degree of truth to them, and that will still be motivation for later on in the year. But yeah, I can't wait for the two of them to play each other again, to be honest.
Yeah, and from what I hear from journalists who were at the game, it wasn't just that this was a once-off thing, that there was complaints about the perception that Galway players were taking a flop during the game. This is, to my mind, this is something that's a recurring topic within the Limerick dressing room, and that they had sort of targeted that if any perceived simulation goes on, we're going to make a big deal out of it. And at the very least, what has happened here, and you can apologise and paper over the cracks and all that kind of stuff, the point has been now made that Galway are divers or simulators, so that the hope being that in the next game that they won't get quite as many frees. So the damage is already done, or you've already kind of marked the referee's card. Whoever's going to be the referee the next time, watch out for Galway diving. So you know what, you do and then you apologise later. So I think the point has been made.
Yeah, I think he's potentially sowing seeds in referees' heads, and if there's a 50-50 call, did he go down a little bit easier or did he not? That potentially the referee mightn't blow, and who knows where that could end up later on in the year. Are Kiely's comments somewhat similar to something that Brian Cody would have made maybe if he was really venting fury over something that he didn't like over the other years?
When frees are criminal, you remember he said after
there you go. That was
Barry Kelly, wasn't it, after 2014?
Kelly, yeah, but he only came out with those comments after. Did he only come out with those comments after they won the All-Ireland?
Yeah, a bit like Jim Gavin after they won the All-Ireland one year, didn't he cut loose on the officiating or something?
2013, 2013, when Mayo had a load of frees near the end. Cyril Farrell seemed to think that Cody would have kept his counsel and brought it to training on Tuesday night rather than maybe making it public. But it's out there now. Whether it'll make a difference remains to be seen, but there's definitely going to be a massive spotlight on them. We raised, we put, Limerick's tackling under the microscope last year, and that is still there. They do make a referee make a decision nearly every time they tackle. Like, it's always hands. You see Will O'Donoghue, who we're both a great admirer of, the hurl is always like that when he's going after someone. There's always kind of little touches. So it'd be interesting to see whether Limerick, pull the reins in on that a small bit, and whether they reduce...
And got an unbelievably harsh second yellow card to get sent off as well. I think there's a lot of that going on, that where teams are kind of risky enough with the hurley coming across. When it works and you do flick the ball away, it looks great. When you don't, it can look a little bit disastrous. But
especially now, Shane, if there's noise, you're generally you're goosed. It's a yellow and a free at least.
Yeah, and I think pretty much every coach out there as well, he says that to his team. Look, lads, if a noise comes, it's going to be a free, and that's kind of it. So that's going to be an interesting game anyway. Tipperary against Galway down in the good field in Thurles. I'll be down at it. We'll talk a bit more about Waterford and Limerick now, just to frame the results so far. Cork beat Waterford handily enough, 5-22 to 1-27 the first day. 1-3 late on, kind of papered over the cracks for Waterford. Waterford then beat Westmeath, a much changed Waterford team. I think they made a dozen changes, 122 to 119. There was 2 red cards for Waterford and 1 for Westmeath. Limerick, they had, as I said, 20 points apiece draw against Tipperary, and then lost to Galway 26 points to 117. So just to jump a little bit further on, these teams have had a habit of meeting in finals recently, but as Liam Cahill said, and obviously he's looking at the 2019 league final, that was Pádraig Fanning over it, then losing both the Munster final and All-Ireland final last year. He says, our record against Limerick of late would be poor. We've been beaten on every occasion we've met them in league and championship. We've made a commitment, all of us, to acquit ourselves really well on our home field here, so we'll be coming all guns blazing next weekend to try and win that match and get our heads back in front again. You're going to be down in Walsh Park for this?
Yeah, looking forward to it, to be honest with you, yeah. Particularly in the Munster final, for the guts of about 50 minutes, Waterford really put it up to them and took them on. But, there's a good few question marks over Waterford probably in their first 2 games. They're obviously got a lot of new faces in. Billy Nolan is in there today. He's in at 6. They were missing Callum Lyons the second day. They left off Stephen Bennett against Westmeath and introduced an awful lot of new faces. But it'd be interesting to see where they are now, having had a couple of games to get, the dirty petrol out of the system and maybe learn a couple of little small bits. Like, there's no greater testing than Limerick coming down to your backyard. It would be right in saying the last time Limerick played down in Walsh Park, they gave them an awful scutcheon in that Munster game in 2019.
Waterford only scored 10 points or something that day. That was a fairly heavy defeat and dispiriting one. So
I'd say, like what he's referencing there, even coming back down to our backyard and our home field, like I'm sure that's still in the forefront of a lot of Waterford players' minds, and they'd love to rectify that. Like, Waterford having not played particularly well in the first 2 games, if they can get a result against Limerick, that kind of turns around their league and gives them lots of momentum going into round 4 and 5 and going into the championship as well. So it's going to be a really, really interesting game. Haven't seen that much of Waterford. So really looking forward to seeing what they're like in the flesh, seeing whether that same energy that they had last year is still there, and whether when they pick up that ball around, anywhere around that middle third, is that same intent to go down the middle and go for goal where possible. That's kind of synonymous with nearly every Cal side. Looking forward to seeing if that's still there. And on the flip side of it then, looking to see, is there going to be much of a reaction from Limerick? Will they go with most of the big guns? Will they be keen to get a result and, not have, draw a loss, draw another loss maybe? Will they be really keen to get back on the horse with a win? So, yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting game. Yeah, and as I said, Waterford are bringing plenty of recent hurt, be it the 19 league final, be it that Munster clash in 19, and of course the 2 games last year as well.
And we probably don't really know where Waterford are at the moment, because the first game, it's hard to know where any team was at after the first game, and conceding 5 goals against Cork, and it could have been many more. Then the second day, they make all those changes. But a recurring theme from both of those games is red cards. So 3 red cards in 2 games. Callum Lyons for that flick the first day. Then Jack Fagan got sent off, and Darragh Lyons as well. And that's something that they obviously have to keep an eye on, because you're not going to win too many games. And that was probably part of the reason that Westmeath, who also went down to 14 men, were able to pull themselves back in. Not to mention that Westmeath played very, very well. So I'm not just putting it down to that alone. So now, I've talked about Tipperary's scoring troubles. And I was looking at Limerick, so they've scored 20 points in each game. If you go 20 points in the first day against Tipperary and 117 the last day against Galway. So 43% of their scores are from place balls as well, not to go too stato on it. But when you consider the scores that Limerick put up last year, for example, against Clare, I think it was 36 points, and some other big scores against other teams. I mean, that's a fair drop-off. And like we talked about Kiely and his reaction, Diarmaid Byrnes getting the red card, a few players a little bit out of form, Kyle Hayes didn't set the world alight at centre-back. He did fine, but maybe he's better off wing-back so he can raid forward. Cian Lynch in the half-forward line, maybe not as prominent as he would be at midfield, but maybe there's a lot of little things going on. Maybe some of it is shuffling the deck too much, and players are almost being played out of form because they're not just allowed to develop in one position, and little combinations of different players together in the same line of the field or whatever. Is there a possibility that Limerick might be overcomplicating things, or just that they might be hitting a road bump at the moment that will give other teams a little bit of encouragement?
Definitely give other teams encouragement anyway at the moment. Like a goal, they never really looked like, pressing the Galway defence or really making something happen. So probably you would have said coming into this year, the full forward line was probably the one line that they needed to strengthen things up a bit. Graham Mulcahy, I think, was their only player not to be. I don't think he got an All-Star. Maybe he did actually get an All-Star nomination, but he would have been the only one where you would have been thinking, yeah, he's probably not sure of his place this year. He hasn't played a league game yet. Not sure if he's had a knock or whatever, but there's been a couple of other guys that have gotten opportunities. Peter Casey came in against Tip, played well, started the last day, got a couple of points, but didn't do anything probably to nail down his place. Cotton O'Neill got a start, didn't set the world alight. So you'd probably be worried a bit about the bluntness of their attack at the moment. As you say, compared to the scores that they were putting up last year, the league tallies so far are way, way down. Obviously, Hegarty's will have another game under his belt. You probably expect Tom Morrissey to start. But all of a sudden, it's funny, you talk about how strong their panel is, and they've all these different guys or whatever. A lot of these guys have gotten chances, to start in games and haven't, nailed down a spot. You would expect to see, David Reedy revert to his impact sub role come championship again. None of these guys have really stepped up. So maybe they've looked, ordinary is not the word, but maybe they've looked a bit more kind of fallible now almost. And, the aura of invincibility is no longer around them. And now they need to produce probably a result at this weekend. If they go, 3 games into the league without getting a win, that would be a bit of a worry. And then you're thinking, is this something similar to 2019 where they didn't react to being All-Ireland champions that well? And I know that's something John Kiely commented on the other day, that they had learned from some of the mistakes of 2019. So they'll be keen to get back on the horse straight away at the weekend. And
I'm sure they'll feel the pressure, because I don't think, as far as I know, Limerick have never retained the All-Ireland title. And it's something they'll really be looking to do this year. See, there's a couple of ways to look at this, and people, please get your comments in and let us know what you think. Is it a case that maybe Limerick are doing that little bit more work, and maybe, you know, those players look in physically massive shape. So maybe it's going to be a case that maybe they've packed on a few more pounds of muscle, and it'll take a few weeks of playing these games and heavy training for them to hit that peak situation by the summer. Maybe they're going to end up that they've timed it perfectly, that Mikey Kiely, the S&C coach, that he's kind of got a bit of a plan that doesn't really revolve around peaking during the league. And we all know that there's the chance that there won't even be a league final played, or a sort of a de facto league final played. And, you know, it might be a chance that we're just not seeing Limerick at the moment, that it's going to come down the line, and while everyone else is kind of getting lulled into a false sense of hope, all of a sudden Limerick are going to peak and they're going to smash us. And by the way, just one other comment as well, if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel grow, so we'd appreciate that.
Every team is in a different position, Shane, going into the league. You'd imagine Galway want to keep winning. Like when Galway won the All-Ireland in 2017, it was based off, you know, a really, really good league campaign that year. You'd imagine they're going to want to keep winning and try to get a win over Tipperary at the weekend. Tipperary, I think the league is about learning. Limerick, we don't really know what their league is about. Maybe it's trying to find one or two extra guys that can actually really, really challenge for starting positions, particularly up front. But you don't know, and you don't know what lads are doing behind the scenes. And it's a risky one, you know, if they're doing heavier training behind the scenes, because that's grand in January, February, because if you pick up a knock, you'll still be grand come championship time. If you're doing heavy training and you play maybe 15 or 20 minutes more of a game, maybe then you should, and all of a sudden you pick up a knock, then all that training you were doing is now redundant. So it'll be interesting to see. Where they're at, or we'll only find that out maybe later. But just a couple of comments in, Shane, on YouTube. Clippers fan, Tip always looked like they're hurling a straitjacket against Limerick. They definitely did in the first round, because I think they played very tactical. They wanted to give themselves the best chance of winning. Clippers fan again just said Waterford lacked the required amount of quality players and are physically imposing players, in my opinion. Not sure if I agree with that. Eamon Maloney said Limerick to beat Waterford is a banker. And Trevor Costello said Sheedy must not fancy them under 20, under 21 lads, or they're not putting their hands up in training. Like, it's all fine saying why doesn't he put them in, unless they're you don't know. We don't know. We don't know if they're showing their hands, but as you said, some of the guys who are mainstays with those teams are no longer in the panel, so you can only work on what you're seeing in training. You know, everybody is in on merit, so interesting to see. There's a lot. It's a lot. Those are the two really marquee games of this weekend, I would say.
But sometimes you don't actually know what you have until you throw them out in league action. Like, they mightn't actually impress that much in training. Maybe you saw it with Offaly over the years, where there was a guy who did okay in training matches, and then all of a sudden, when he was put out with the other 14 players who were considered first choice, all of a sudden he took off. It's, you know, this is something that I said before, like Cathal Barrett all of a sudden was thrown in with the Tip team 2014, takes off. Tip people weren't really expecting it, and he wouldn't be the only example.
Yeah, horse trainers always say about certain horses, they show absolutely nothing on the gallops. Or maybe they don't impress on the gallops. They put them out on a race course, and all of a sudden they absolutely thrive. And you've probably seen different players at different levels, where a guy could be average, you know, playing with an intermediate club side, but he could make the step up to senior county level and survive. And even thrive sometimes, particularly guys playing in the backs. I remember Martin Hannamy used to always say, Martin Hannamy that always played for Offaly. He was cornerback for Offaly and one of the great cornerbacks, particularly in the 90s. But he said, like, sometimes he might have been asked to play maybe a more central position, maybe particularly with his club, and all of a sudden he was expected to do different things that he was not expected to do in his role with Offaly, and it was just different and more challenging. Whereas when he knew his role, and his role was a cornerback, if he played cornerback with his club, he probably would have been more of an asset cornerback than playing fullback or centre back. So I do think that's kind of interesting. Sometimes you do have to throw guys in there. Fairness, like Brian Cody has probably thrown more guys in there than any other manager over the last while, and he would have learned a lot. It's not to say you're throwing mud at a wall and seeing what sticks is probably, you know, not a fair term. But when you throw guys in, all of a sudden you find out he's thrown James Bergen in the 2 league games this year so far, and he's thrived at that level, coming from a guy who was playing Kilkenny Junior Club hurling last year. So you just probably don't know, but you'd imagine they have to be showing something in training against guys that are, you know, that's a corner forward. A new player has to show something against Cathal Barrett, has to show that he can survive against him in training before they're going to put him out in championship. You don't just hand guys league or championship starts, you know, unless they've earned it.
Seamus Harnedy would be another player that maybe people in a wider sense hadn't heard of him, came from a small club, St. Edith's, and then he starts to take over for Cork and is a huge part of their run to 2013 All-Ireland. If there's any players you can think of that we haven't mentioned, please mention them. And just a reminder, we're brought to you by Bamboo from Torpy. Go to their website, which is linked in the video description, and use the promo code OurGame, all caps, and you get 10% off. We'll just jump on to Cork against Westmeath. So that's going to be a Páirc Uí Chaoimh this weekend. Just to rehash the results that Westmeath have had so far, they had a heavy defeat to Galway the first day by 30 points. And then in their most recent outing, they pushed Waterford pretty close, 122 to 119. For Cork's part, they drew with Tipperary last weekend, 216 to 22. And then the first day out scored 522 against Waterford, who came in with 127. Now, obviously, the first thing I think of when I see this matchup is that a couple of years ago, Westmeath conceded 140 against Cork in a qualifier match. But even just after what happened last weekend, Westmeath putting up a very good showing against a much changed Waterford team, it must be said. Shane O'Neill, he said, I was keen that the lads would, Shane O'Brien, the manager of Westmeath, said, I was keen that the lads would show what they're made of. And the way they fought for every single ball showed the spirit in the group. Many other teams might have gone down the blame game route, but during the week the spirit was high and our training was first class. Now this is a big test because I don't know if Cork will shuffle their deck, but if they don't, in a big pitch like Páirc Uí Chaoimh, this is a game that'll test Westmeath to the last.
Oh, big time. And like Cork's mentality is not going to change regardless of who they're playing. We saw with Laois, many years ago, if they can hit 10 goals, they will hit 10 goals. I don't think, isn't it funny, you mentioned that 140. I don't think that's the same Cork team now. I think Kieran Kingston would be much happier if they hit 725 rather than 140 now. I think the idea of the handy point, or maybe not breaking the line and taking on your man and tipping the ball over the bar, is gone maybe from their mindset now. So they'll have not only green flags on their mind. So interesting to see how Westmeath set up. I know they played a sweeper, and at times they played two sweepers when they played them in that game in Cusack Park a couple of years ago. But like it is a daunting enough task for Westmeath, because when you're chasing shadows, when Cork are moving around like they were, particularly the first day out against Waterford, and to a lesser extent against Tipperary. And if you look at possession stats of how much percentages Cork have had the ball, they could have the ball 70 to 75% of the time, because they're going to hold on to it when they have it. So it'll be interesting to see what Westmeath do to try and curb them. But you would be a bit worried. The only thing I would say is, fairness to them, geez, they bounced back with a right good performance last week, and we're right in the game down to death, even if Waterford did lose a couple of players, and that's a good sign of where they're at, because it easily could have just went the other way, and it could have been another heavy defeat, and they'd nearly just writing off the whole league campaign, and they're just waiting for that kind of relegation clash just to stay up in Division 1. So in fairness to them, if they can keep within 10 or 15 of Cork at the weekend, I think they wouldn't be happy, but that'd be something. And not for their, not to concede 3 or 4 early goals. If they do, they could be in for a big hammering. But hopefully they'll keep it as tight as they can, and keep it, the respectability that they brought against Waterford, and that kind of honest endeavour, and keeping it real tight that they brought against Waterford. They're going to have to bring that this weekend again.
Yeah, I'm just looking back over the notes that I made after the Tipperary and Cork draw last weekend. Will we see more of that carrying ball, the hand pass? I'd imagine Westmeath will play with at least one man back. Maybe they'll just play with a single man up front, maybe just two up inside the 45 at different times when they don't have the ball. And how will Cork deal with that? Another thing that stands out to me here is, as I look at the early parts of the second half, so it was 12 points to Tipperary, 1-8 to Cork at half time. And Cork didn't score until the 44th minute then, and it was a goal. And after that, they scored a point from a free. So between half time and I think going all the way up to the 57th minute, they scored just 1-1 from play. Obviously a free in on top of it as well. But Tipperary were allowed to completely take over the game. Now Cork finished relatively strongly later on in that half, but they certainly didn't blow you away for 70 minutes. And that's the big question I have after watching them in Thurles the last day. I can see what Cork are trying to build, and I think there's a lot of promise to it. And then, Robbie O'Flynn has to come back into the team. Seamus Harnedy didn't play. They have more options to come, Colm Spillane. But, can this game plan work for 70 minutes? And as we're talking, it's absolutely spilling. God knows what sort of a weekend we'll get in terms of leading to flowing hurling. But what Cork are doing at the moment, it's a tough job to make that last for 70 minutes and be on the top of the ground, spraying the ball around and players interchanging and running off the shoulder.
It definitely is. It's fair demanding and energy sapping, in fairness, isn't it? And you're basically essentially running the ball from one end of the pitch to the other. You see how difficult it is for football teams to do that unless you're high end of fitness. It's going to break down at times as well because, they're only refining it. In many ways, they're only learning it at the moment, to be honest with you. So it's definitely going to break down at various stages, as you say, that second half. It definitely did break down. You'd be worried in the big cut and thrust of a big championship game, particularly, a Munster semi-final against Limerick. If you have that 15 or 20 minute spell where you're struggling and maybe you don't get your hands on the ball and you don't get many shots away, that could be game over. So I like what Cork are doing. I kind of already have it in my head that this year could come a bit too soon to be maybe All-Ireland contenders, but they're definitely, with the age profile of the team as well, generally they're playing a game that suits the players they have available. They're not, outside of Robert Downey, they're not 6'4". They're all 6 foot-ish, about 13 stone, real mobile, quick players, all good ball players. Patrick Collins is an interesting one in goals as well. I think he had one long puck out the other day, probably because he had to. So it's going to be interesting to see, I don't know if Westmeath will be able to do it, but will teams start pressing them? You won't give Cork possession of the ball in a big championship game, I wouldn't think, because you're going to try and make them win it. So it'll be interesting to see how teams go at them in that kind of way. But they're definitely still learning on the job, and that game plan takes an awful lot of practice.
Yeah, so it's a big game for both teams in different ways. Westmeath will want to make sure they give a good account of themselves yet again and just very much consign that Galway performance to history. So we'll move on to Division 1 Group B. Obviously the round 3 fixtures are going on this weekend as well. Dublin Antrim we'll talk about in a minute, Laois Clare, but we can't but start with Kilkenny against Wexford. Brian Cody against Davy Fitz. Always an enjoyable one to look forward to. A couple of Wexford senior hurlers have tested positive for COVID-19. There's no suggestion, as we're speaking right now, that the game is going to be called off. But what we can't ignore is what Paul Galvin said this week in the Examiner podcast. He questioned the motivation behind Davy Fitz to call players into the hurling setup who'd been released from the football panel, and he said as follows. This was part of many quotes he had in relation to it, but I didn't mind a bit of chicanery. I released a few players. He brought them into the hurling squad. Same training ground, dressing rooms, pitches, corridors, car park, same training nights. And I felt that was a bit of a statement. And I took it on the chin because he's around a long time and Davy's a wily old fox. He's gained a little bit of soft power in the media that he uses quite cleverly.
Hold on a second now. Can we stop there? That's a really interesting quote. That's a really, really interesting quote. Basically saying that Davy has essentially, bought some of the media, but you can move on.
Well, has he bought some of the media, or is it just...
He knows how to play the game, I would say.
Yeah, well, like everyone in the media, and I think most people who are pundits and enjoy reading and watching stuff about GAA, they know that his quotes are in demand, that he is basically in demand. He wouldn't be getting TV shows like Davy's Fittest Families or whatever the programmes are called. I'm not 100% sure what they're called. But he wouldn't be getting that if there wasn't an appeal to him. Everyone knows that Davy is box office. It's why also when he wasn't a manager for a while, he had like newspaper columns. And whenever he does decide to finish up, he will be offered punditry jobs left, right and centre. He is box office, and that's kind of it. And I think
people
because
love to hate him, love to love him, and love to hate him.
Yeah,
he's kind of a divisive character, but he's divisive. But people, it's like some people, a lot of people kind of hate McGregor, but they'd still probably nearly buy the pay-per-view to see him get beaten if they hate him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's true. It's always, I wonder what he has to say about it next. And because the media know that that they'd like access to him, I think what Paul Galvin is referring to, that some of the media don't criticise him too harshly or don't always come down hard on him because they feel like, well, look, we'll need to keep him on side to some degree here because we might want him for, an interview after a game or whatever it might be. But that happens across the GAA, probably every sporting media, probably all media in general anyway, that because they need access, you can't always go too hard. So it's not a Davy only thing, but I think that's what Galvin's referring to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's a fine balance, like from a professional point of view, like, you have to do your job, but you can't like cut ties with people as well. Like,
Yeah, you and I would love to call out players constantly and say, "Did you see what he did last weekend? That was absolutely scandalous," or whatever. You just can't do it, and people might say, "Oh, you have to be able to call it," but you have to find a balance too, because you do have to face these players and chat to them the next day or whatever it might be. There might be a press event, and you have to talk to them, look them in the eye, and if you've cut the back off them in an unbelievably harsh, over the top way, that's very difficult to kind of, so you have to find a balance. There's a human element of it here. Like in GAA, the people that you're talking about are the people that you bump into on the street. It's not like soccer or Conor McGregor, where I can say, like, I think he's been an embarrassment to Ireland for years. Not as a fighter. Well, in more recent years, when did he last win a big fight against someone who was at the top of their game? God knows how far you have to go back. But the point is, we can kind of cut loose on professional players and stuff like that. But you just can't do it with GA, whether it's a manager, as Paul Galvin is talking about here, or players. So I'll just finish out the quote anyway.
Yeah.
So Galvin said, "I took it on the chin because we needed results and I had to keep my head down. The thing that really annoyed me," by the way, he was Wexford football manager, in case anyone didn't recall that. "The thing that really annoyed me was that when he made a big man of himself in the media on the back of it, and he started talking about all the respect he had for me in the media and making a virtuous man of himself on the back of it. The reality behind the scenes, that wasn't the case at all. I felt it was trying to maybe put me in the halfpenny place a little bit and put football in the halfpenny place a little bit." What do you make of that?
it's like something out of Hello magazine or something. two boys juking it out behind the scenes. Yeah, I obviously don't know exactly what the scenario was there, but it definitely, like, two of the most colourful characters probably in the history of the GA, having all these little mini battles, be it over players, be it over facilities. While Wexford is a dual county, like, hurling is the priority in Wexford. It is more important in Wexford, particularly since Davy came there. He obviously took it from a reasonably low ebb and got them up high again, and won a Leinster in 19, got to an Ireland semi-final, narrowly beaten that year as well. And I'd imagine, we know how intense Davy can be at different times. I'd say there's a lot of different things going on in the background there. I contacted Davy for comment on it on Tuesday morning. I didn't get any word back, but it'll be interesting to hear what he does have to say about it whenever he talks about it.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be asked after the game whether he wants to comment. It's another thing.
You're getting on now, me.
Brian Cody, I was just looking at my stats, and when you take into account the Leinster title of last year, he's been player or manager for 45 of Kilkenny's 126 titles in their history, and I think that refers to Leinster titles, All-Ireland titles and league titles. It really is quite crazy. So again, it comes back to it. Even if results aren't going perfectly, or they somewhat struggled against Antrim last week. Now, Antrim people will rightly think our team played very, very well, came from 8 points down and levelled the game, and then later on Kilkenny pulled away. But, Kilkenny didn't, like, when I saw that forward line named last weekend, and I think you were the same, it looked like a pretty blunt forward line. TJ Reid wasn't available, Wally Walsh wasn't there, Richie Hogan wasn't there, obviously Colin Fennelly isn't involved this year. It did look like probably the most blunt forward line we've seen from Kilkenny in a long, long time. Now, they got that result, but where are you at with Kilkenny after two games? They've won both games by 5 points against Dublin as well, but not exactly, if there was any doubts coming into the season, it's not like all of a sudden they've put up massive scores against two teams that, look, let's be honest, they're not going to be winning the All-Ireland.
No, I think you know what you're going to get from Kilkenny the whole time. You get this kind of honest endeavour. They'll rarely throw in a clanger of a performance, and even if they do, there'll be a bounce back to it. But there's nothing. We haven't seen anything yet to suggest, that they can take it to another level with the group of players that they have.
Now, they've scored 120 and 128, so when I mentioned the blunt forward line, that's probably the first thing people will say.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have envisaged them scoring 128 without TJ the other day, without Wally, and without Richie Hogan. So maybe we're not doing the guys that played last weekend justice. But I'm just wondering, like, if they're looking at finding that 10 or 15% and maybe more that they need to find. I'm not sure if we've seen enough. James Bergen would say has come in and impressed. Pádraig Walsh has been solid at defence, particularly the first day out. Conor Brown has been good at half back as well. But have there been any big tactical or structural changes really. I don't really think so. Has there been any, like, have we seen anything really different from them? Not really. You kind of, what you see is what you get. But I don't know, until we see something a little extra. I'm just not sure how they're going to win in All Ireland with this kind of group of players that they have.
Can you see them winning the Leinster title this year?
I can see them getting to a final. Well, I think
they have to do it the hard way this year, though. They're going to have to beat Wexford, and let's say we go along form lines in terms of who's favourites. They'd have to beat Wexford and Galway.
Yeah, no, fair point. It's going to be a much tougher passage this year. Whereas, they were, I always thought when they played Dublin in the semi-final last year, I didn't see them being beaten. The stock placed on this game at the weekend is pretty big, because when Wexford have had a good year and had the strong arm of Kilkenny, they've invariably beaten them in the league that year. They did it when they met in 19 earlier on in that league. The opposite was the case in 2018.
They did it in 17. I think they won in Nolan Park for the first time in 60 years, something like that.
Then all of a sudden they beat them down in Wexford Park in 17. So I think Davy would be delighted with getting a result in Clare last weekend when things weren't going particularly well. They were 8 down at one stage and managed just to get over the line. And I think he'll be keen. He has a good record against Cody as Wexford manager. Maybe not as Waterford manager, but he's done well. With Wexford, and the percentages absolutely rocketed up compared to when Wexford played Kilkenny under any other manager during Cody's reign. So I think whoever they have available to them at the weekend, they'll be going with the strongest side that they have.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at their team the last day, and Pádraig Walsh, as you mentioned, was very good at centre back. James McNaughton was centre forward at the other side, and I'm sure he swapped position and was kind of floating away from Pádraig Walsh, who would have had to hold the centre at different times. But he did score 6 points, 2 of them were frees. But he was able to run into space an awful lot. That forward line certainly troubles Kilkenny. And 3-15, scoring 3 goals against Kilkenny is no mean feat, especially in their own backyard.
And a penalty saved as well, like.
Yeah, and you can't ignore that. Those are signs there. Antrim are a developing team and they're on an upward curve. But I think a lot of people would have expected the 12-point handicap to be covered. It was 12 points, I think. I remember you saying that
10.
Saying that last week. Now, the flip side is the likes of Martin Keown. Now, he scored 2 points the last day. He was very, very good against Dublin. So maybe he's ready to kick on another level this year. James Bergen, he scored 4 the last day. Was good against Dublin. You've already mentioned him. Adrian Mullen, who had been very quiet against Dublin and brought off at half-time, and maybe that was partly minded him after doing the Cruciate last year. He scored 3 points. Alan Murphy came in, 9 frees but also 4 from play. So there's definitely some green shoots as well. I'd be very interested to hear from Kilkenny fans. If they want to send in any comment, or any other people who have any thoughts on Kilkenny, let us know what you think about their trajectory this year. And if you think this game against Wexford is particularly important. It's in Nolan Park as well. Certainly there's no way that they'll want to be beaten down in Nolan Park, because over the last few years, a couple of the records of, Kilkenny not being beaten by certain teams at Nolan Park for such and such years and stuff like that, that kind of stuff has been whittled away at the whole time. So for the new team to kick on and try and, end what is becoming a bit of a mini famine in terms of All Ireland at Kilkenny, they need to start making their home a fortress and things like that.
Yeah, like it was with the great team in the noughties. Like, getting a win down there was absolutely massive.
Rare's hen's teacher.
Yeah, like Tip took a pace in there in 2009. Cork took a pace in there at one stage as well. It was almost like they were, you talk about league matches being league matches, but there was massive statements made by those teams against opposition that they were going to be playing later on in the year. So I think it's important for this team to do the same, and to get a win over Wexford in Nolan Park would be big. It'd be interesting to hear from Kilkenny people, any viewers, like, where do they think Kilkenny are at? What's realistic for Kilkenny in 2021? What are realistic aspirations? Do a lot of people in Kilkenny think this is Cody's last stand as well? And if so, who do they think is going to be the man to replace him? So yeah, a lot could change. A lot could change potentially in Kilkenny over the next 4 to 5 months. So this is probably one of the biggest periods of Cody's 23 seasons in charge of Kilkenny. This is probably one of the biggest periods of it. And if they can get a win over Wexford, keep things floating along nicely, they're probably going to beat Laois as well. So they could end up with 4 or 5 wins from a league campaign heading into championship.
Yeah, but to be fair, they are on the more favourable side of the league calendar. I think everyone would sort of accept that. I'm interested to see, is Darren Brennan going to be given another shot in goals, because he was very good the last day, and Owen Murphy is arguably the best in the business. So that's a little battle there. Maybe Cody is pitting them against each other, and I think any good panel and any good manager, that's what you're looking to do.
You get a lad to step up to another level potentially then as well, yeah. And Brennan will be ready then whenever Owen Murphy retires, or to come in, and a lot more ready to come in then too.
Yeah, and there was a bit of a balance of experience and sort of blooding lads on the bench the last day. John Donnelly came on. You know, you and I both have talked about how important he's been in the last year or so. Joey Holden came on, experienced player. Conor Fogarty, very, very experienced player. And then guys that we probably have seen less of, Tygo Dwyer, Michael Carey, DJ's son, and Owen O'Shea, they came in laterally in the game as well. So I'd be... Do you know what? The other thing, the flip side for Davy Fitz, is they came back from behind to beat Clare the last day. Now, a red card to Liam Curry was huge in terms of turning that game. Wexford used the ball very well. Rory O'Connor came on and just ran rings around different players. Lee Chin stepped up, but Rory O'Connor was just so massive in that game. I think he's setting himself up to have a serious season. But what looked like it could have been quite a dispiriting loss to Clare, you know, they were sort of soldiers of fortune, and unlike Tipperary 2019 All-Ireland semi-final, they figured out how to play against 14 men. And that could be, again, just back to this whole spark to kind of light things for the season. That could be big for them.
That's all you need, like, overcome adversity. A game that obviously meant an awful lot to Davy back at home, and against like his arch nemesis Brian Lohan as well. It's obviously going to mean a lot to them to have that in the bank now. You just find, like, you know, if you're losing a game, like just say they were beating 5 or 6 points, you just find that it may be a bit harder in training the week after, in games, and maybe think things aren't going as well. You just need it's only a case of, you know, a little small thing like that, and then they catch fire all of a sudden. And then all of a sudden this weekend, if they get a result in Nolan Park, and they're thinking, geez, we were down now against Clare, produced a result. Up until 2017, we hadn't won in Nolan Park in how many years? Now we've won twice in 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden kind of things are building. Just on the Kilkenny point of view here, Shane, James O'Keefe, one of the viewers here, just said, as a Kilkenny fan, I thought we would struggle up front, as really depending on TJ to get us over the line. Other than TJ, none of the forwards have really proven themselves as top level inter-county players or inter-county forwards. Clippers fan just said there's definitely a path to an All-Ireland final for KK. Galway could easily bottle a Leinster final, and then KK would hope to get Waterford or Cork in the semi-final. James Murphy, another Kilkenny man. As a Kilkenny man, serious concerns regarding our midfield, something that we've said before. 2 cornerback slots and 2 half-backs. Haven't really settled properly on pairings in these positions properly for a good few years. Lots of changes, and there has been, like, Conor Brown was midfield in 19, he was cornerback at one stage last year, and then he was midfield at one stage last year, and he ended up at wing back. Buckley's played 6, he's played 7, he's played 8 and 9. So there's been a lot of guys. Fogarty's played wing back, he's played midfield, and they've been moving kind of between the two. So they haven't really settled on anything there. So it's going to be interesting to see, will they try and keep things as steady as they can. But as I said, the 2 cornerbacks were probably in trouble the last day against Antrim. So don't be too surprised to see new faces in there again.
Do you think Kilkenny keep moving players around like that because they're just hoping to eventually stumble on the mix that will kind of give them the best chance, that will give them the best team? Or is it reflective of, we don't actually have the right formation, tactics, maybe we just don't have the right quality of player at the moment, but because we don't have the right tactics, we have to keep moving things around until eventually, hopefully, we find something that works? Because a lot of people do say that, you know, rightly or wrongly, people get their comments in. Plenty of people think that Kilkenny are a bit too agricultural in terms of how they set up and use the ball. But is it down to that he has to keep moving things around for one of those 2 reasons, to just hope it clicks?
Yeah, potentially, yeah. And Conor Delaney, who was probably one of their best defenders last year, has been missing for their opening couple of games as well. So one of their pillars maybe in the full back line is gone too. But yeah, I do agree. I do agree to a fair extent, because there's been that many changes over the last couple of years, and that many different guys tried in positions that, you know, he's trying to find this combination. But I don't know how much time you get if you're not going well, and everyone will have, you know, bad games at different stages. But a lot of the time with Kilkenny, you know, if you have a bad game, you're not playing the next day. So, and all of a sudden that erodes your confidence. Then if you do get back in, your confidence might have been chipped away at. So it's a kind of find a happy medium there. And Cody's obviously an old school manager to an extent too. So I'm not sure do lads get the arm around the shoulder maybe as much as maybe in some other counties. So just that's just my own opinion on it. I'd say there's been a good few guys have had their confidence kind of gone up and down, been put in, maybe pulled off at half time, not getting a game for a good while, been put on the game, then maybe not getting a look the next day. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, we had a talk about Dublin and where Dublin hurling is going there last weekend, or just after the match last weekend. And I was interested in one of the parents of a young player, a juvenile player in Dublin, got on to me and just said, pointed out that in Dublin, for the Go games, that under-8 players, that they're not allowed to get the ball into their hands. So it's all ground hurling, even though plenty of them can actually do it at that age. Whereas the kind of national recommendations is that you're allowed one hop of the ball on the hurley under-8s and under-9s. So I wonder, can people get their comments in from different parts of the country and let us know, do you feel that what's allowed in terms of juvenile games at certain underage levels is sort of holding players back? Because if you're, let's say you have a child and they're 8 years of age and they're well able to run with the ball on the hurley and stuff like that, is it holding them back a little bit that they can't be in game situations and actually use that and develop that?
Yeah, if you're able to do it, I think you probably should be let do it. I would put some maybe restrictions on it, like only ground hurling sounds a small bit prehistoric to me, and I know they're trying to make it as inclusive and not have the stronger players dominate. But like if guys are able to take the ball in their hand, I definitely would let them maybe take their 4 steps anyway, and at least get a big strike away, even if it is at that level. So I wouldn't be placing too many restrictions. You wouldn't obviously be letting players solo the length of the pitch at under-8 level, and then all of a sudden in an 8-side game you've 3 or 4 guys that are totally dominating and 12 that are barely touching the ball. But like with due respect, and ground hurling was such a cornerstone of the success of Offaly hurling. But like you're essentially then teaching guys or young kids at 6, 7, 8 to do something that they're not going to be doing at senior level. Like you're just not going to be doing that at senior level anymore. So surely you should be getting them ready for the environment that they're going to, be in at 9s, 11s, 13s, and all the way up.
Yeah, well, like pulling on the ball is a great skill and it can look quite nice, but it's almost a symptom of headlessness on the pitch these days when you whip on that ball. I mean, Limerick are the most composed team around on the ball. Would you agree with that? And
yeah, I tip are fairly composed on the ball too now, in fairness.
But anyway, we won't argue the toss, but they're a very, very composed team on the ball, and the way they hand pass it around the middle until eventually someone comes off the shoulder and delivers. I always refer back to that game at the tail end of 2017 when they lost the qualifier to Kilkenny down at Nolan Park. There was 3 times in the game when this was John Kiely's first season, where players headlessly pulled on the ball on the ground, and I could not get over it at the time. So it's something that you do need to develop, and players can. And obviously, if the Limerick team can develop in the space of 3 or 4 years when they're already adults, obviously young players can do it too. But I would be curious to get people's thoughts on that. But certainly one parent in Dublin was very frustrated at that, and he was saying if I had a choice between taking the kid to soccer or hurling based on those rules being in place, I'd nearly take them to the soccer. So that's something worth keeping in mind. But now if we jump on to the game this weekend, Dublin against Antrim. Antrim, of course, as we mentioned, had that performance against Kilkenny at the weekend, and that franked their win over Clare the first day, 121 to 22 points. Whereas Dublin, they lost to the Cats by 120 to 18 points, and then bounced back last weekend with a 30 points to 119 win over Laois at O'Moore Park in Portlaoise. These two teams are going to meet in Leinster, so there's something on the line here.
Oh, without a doubt there is, yeah, and definitely. And it was interesting to hear Darren Gleeson's comments after the game the other day, while he said about, the foundations had been laid that Clare game, but they weren't getting ahead of themselves, or anything like that. It was interesting. He basically called out their work rate post Kilkenny. There was no, moral victories or anything like that. He just said the consistency wasn't there for us today. We probably weren't allowed. Kilkenny are a serious outfit, but we didn't work hard enough in the first half, and if we don't do that, we're in trouble. We recovered it well. We just have to learn how to finish it out at that level. It wasn't nervousness or anything like that. We just didn't get the pace of the game, and when you don't work hard, you don't get to the level of the game. From 8 to 15, we didn't get the work rate we looked for. That's it, simple as that. And then in the second half, we did. We just have to be consistent in that against a big team. So probably a good learning experience for them. But it's just interesting. Like every team is underpinned by how hard they work, all over the pitch, but he's obviously singled out 8 to 15 there, and they've lots to work on going up against Dublin at the weekend, and I'd imagine there'll be maybe one eye or maybe more than one eye on that championship game, getting a look at Dublin, seeing potentially areas that they could expose in Dublin, and they will. I think at this juncture, Gleeson will fancy that game against Dublin this weekend, and I think he'll fancy the championship game as well. I think they'll learn as much as they can from the Dubs playing the Dubs this weekend, but they will fancy their chances of causing what will be a big upset in the championship.
I put it to you this way: I think Dublin have a very strong backline, and Antrim's strength is probably their forward line. They have a lot of tasty forwards, like nippy lads, and then it was interesting to see that Neil McManus was playing the full forward line and got his goal in there the last day against Kilkenny. But that Dublin backline of Paddy Smith, Owen O'Donnell, Andrew Murphy, or Dunphy, who's been looked quite good in the first two games. Dara Gray is a powerful man, as is Liam Rush and Sean Moran, of course, as well. Then in midfield, Conor Burke and James Madden. I sometimes wonder, are they native midfielders, or have they been sort of converted into midfielders? They've both done well at times. They're both able to get around the pitch. And in the half-forward line, Danny Sutcliffe, Chris Crummy and Ronan Hayes. I'm interested to see how Crummy... actually, the three of those guys are all very good at catching high ball. And it'll be interesting to see if whoever's in goals for Dublin, whether it's Sean Brennan or Alan Nolan, just pumps down high ball on top of them. But that Antrim forward line, just to go through a couple of other names, I've already touched on James McNaughton, Michael Bradley, Conal Cunning, Conor McCann, Kieran Clark, Niall McKenna, of course. And then coming in off the bench, they had some other lads, the likes of Donal Nugent as well, who brings some presence in there. So I see it as a battle of Antrim's forward line against Dublin's back line. And I think Antrim are going to have, I think Dublin have a superior backline to, if you're going to go player for player, to Kilkenny. Maybe not everyone would agree with me on that. But I think that Antrim team is going to have its work cut out for it getting 3 goals.
Yeah, then obviously at the other end, you wonder, Dublin put up a decent score against Laois. 30 points is nothing to be sniffed at. Obviously, Donald Burke probably had just over half of that. But you'd imagine Antrim could get a bit of joy in attack, and if they can snuff out maybe the likes of Sutcliffe up the other end, I think they'll fancy their chances. There won't be more than a puck of the ball or 2 pucks of the ball in this game, I'd imagine. I just have to say, Shane, your comment about underage coaching has really sparked a big debate here. So just lots of different people have commented. Pat O'Brien, do you think the Standing Committee on Playing Rules might come out and explain the recent rule changes? Nothing heard from Croke Park, which is interesting. Jimmy Juice's bar said inclusion shouldn't be at the expense of proper hurling, which I'd have to agree. Clippers fan said 100% Shane, the coaching guidelines tell coaches to get under 6s and even under 8s to play ground hurling. Under 6s forced to play with a laughably big ball as well. Someone else said here, ground hurling is so archaic. There was an interesting one here from BMT Irishman T. You don't tell a 7-year-old soccer player to stop dribbling just because his teammates can't. The same principle applies to all sport, which is a fair point. What you're doing should probably make more sense to what the overall picture is long term. But just as regards Dublin and Antrim, you probably have 2 teams that are maybe on different trajectories. Antrim are still on an upward trajectory. Dublin, I'm not sure where Dublin are at, being honest with you, but you definitely couldn't say they're on an upward trajectory, and they have to take a massive leap to go probably from, they're probably 7th or 8th at the moment. They're going to have to take a massive leap to get up into that 4 or 5 category, and nothing I've seen so far this year suggests that they're going to.
I think they'll win this game, though. I think the forward line that I named out for Dublin, Ronan Hayes, now maybe he'll play in the inside line, remains to be seen. Chris Crummy, Danny Sutcliffe, Keane Boland, was impressive from the start against Laois as well. A couple of other names now, like just Donald Burke, of course, who impressed a lot at different times last year, and maybe there's more in him too. Eamon Trollier Dillon, then Oisin O'Rourke. I'm interested to see if Oisin O'Rourke gets a bit more game time this year. So I think Dublin they have a lot of very athletic players, lads who are able to turn and go at you. Maybe they're lacking a little bit of quality up at the top end of the field, as we always say, but I'd be back in Dublin to win this game, and I'd be curious to hear what other people think as well.
Well, they'd want to be winning it, because I'd imagine they're very, very short odds to be winning it. They've been playing at this level for a lot longer than
if Antrim can beat Clare, then you would say that Clare and Dublin aren't at too dissimilar a level, and some people might say the Banner are ahead of them.
Yeah, I know, but that's kind of a one-off. That's a one-off game to an extent. They're coming in against the Dublin side who's been playing Division One hurling for a good while now, whereas Antrim were playing at lower tiers. But nothing would surprise me. Nothing would surprise me too much with Antrim. I think as long as they get within, they're there coming down the home stretch against Dublin. I think they'll see that as another bit of kind of learning along to this that championship game, and cause an upset in that championship game. I'd say would make their year even more so than the Clare victory. So I expect it to be tight enough. I would expect Dublin to win though.
Yeah, so Laois are playing Clare in the final game. That's going to be in Port Laois again. Laois, of course, beaten heavily the first day out by Wexford, 4-17 to 10 points. Then the last day conceded 30 points, scoring 119. For Clare, from Clare's point of view, lost, of course, the first day out in Antrim, and then the last day out were well ahead against Wexford, but the red card in the second half very much hampered them, and they ultimately lost by 219 to 121 against Davy Fitz. So where do you see Clare as being at? We said on Monday that, well, certainly my opinion was that it wasn't too bad to lose this game because you had shown a nice bit. It was a response in terms of performance to what they had showed up in Antrim.
Yeah, good few players stepped up. Like, I thought Dermot Ryan was decent the first day against Antrim, even in a new position. I thought he was very good the last day. Aidan McCarthy is probably another one of these classic cases of more effective out the pitch. It's funny, you could play a guy even if he's a natural full forward or corner forward now, and he could be more effective out the pitch now with the way modern hurling is. He was brilliant when he came out the pitch. I think Tony Kelly's an interesting one. He had a dead leg the last day, and he's kind of touch and go for the weekend from what I'm hearing. Do you risk playing Tony Kelly at this stage with the possibility of him missing more time as a result of that, or aggravating a knock more? They obviously need to win at the weekend, but you kind of have to see the bigger picture as well. But being defeated by Laois at this weekend would fairly take, there's not too much wind in their sails at the moment. Would fairly get rid of any sort of a breeze that's blowing behind them. Saw that Derek Lynch there as well, the Clare sports journalist, said that the Clare under-20s weren't provided with food after training, I believe, last night. Kind of another negative news story. Kind of seems to be one after another in Clare. Being defeated by Laois at the weekend would be a disaster. There's no point in saying any different, because they would have always seen that defeat to Antrim as a fairly fairly sore kind of sucker punch to receive. But to be defeated by Laois this weekend would be worse, if anything. And obviously Laois put it up to them in that qualifier last year and could have easily gotten a result against them. So yeah, they just need to get a result this weekend and just get off the board.
Yeah, and that qualifier last year, I think Clare were looking like they were going to win comfortably enough up until David McInerney got sent off, and of course I think it was just a point in it for a finish, and Clare just about escaped with their lives. But then they went on to perform really well against Wexford. And if David Reedy isn't playing, if Tony Kelly isn't playing, Shane O'Donnell, maybe, I'm not sure if McInerney is ready to come back as well. They are down a few players there. So but the flip side is Laois are probably missing. They're missing an awful lot of players from last year. I think we've kind of named them out before. And even though they put up a decent score, losing by 8 points to Dublin for a finish, but conceding 30 points after conceding 4-17 is very, very heavy score. Now, one big plus point that I don't think we mentioned on Monday was Chad Dwyer's brilliant goal, where he was being bottled up, he had his back to goal, and he just threw it up and flicked it behind himself. It was brilliant stuff, somewhat reminiscent of Henry Shefton 07 against Limerick. Now, I know he was facing towards the goal, but just, when you're being pulled and dragged out of, a bit of improvisation is always nice.
I'd say it was nearly more like Richie Hogan's goal against Galway last year.
Yeah,
it's kind of back to the goal, but it's like something you try in training out the middle of the field or something like that. But to actually have the the ingenuity to try it in front of goal was brilliant. He's like Chaz, a class player. I've seen him put over some serious line balls. I've seen him put over some serious points from out near the sideline as well. When they beat Offaly in the championship, I think it was in 15, he got 5 or 6 outrageous points from distance. Good to have him back on board, but they are down a good few bodies. I think they'd be, it definitely would have lifted the spirit, the performance in general against Dublin last weekend, and they'd be looking for more of the same this weekend. They obviously had new management in, new coaches, a whole new setup. It's going to take probably that a little bit longer to bed in, with only 4 weeks realistically done collectively. So Cheddar will be expecting a kind of a bounce and better performances as the league goes on.
So we'll move on to Division 2A this weekend, and Kerry are going to be against Meath and Carlow against Offaly. So Offaly, very, very impressive last weekend against, I think it was Kerry.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it too much. We were kind of caught for time on Monday, but that was a brilliant performance. And you couldn't have really seen it coming, to be honest with you. Offaly were very good against Meath the week before and put up a big score. But Kerry have kind of had Kerry have dominated Offaly in recent years to some extent. They relegated them to from the Joe McDonagh in 19, and they beat them in the league down in Kerry last year. I know Shane Conway wasn't playing, who was a big loss, but that was a big win for Offaly. I think we're really starting to see the effect of Johnny Kelly's coach and that slick kind of passing that we would have seen with Boris Ali on the run to the All-Ireland final. Last year, Offaly's play was quite exaggerated. It's just a little bit more direct and a little bit crisper. The passes are no longer 4 and 5 yards and bodies in on top of each other. Now it's 15 and 20 yard passes and loads of lads running off the shoulder. Ross Ravenhill, a young enough player, is impressing at midfield. My own clubmate Owen Cattle got this outrageous point, this flicked point that I think we're going to have to try and recreate at some stage, even though my wrist would probably break if I tried it.
Well, he miscontrolled the ball before he flicked it brilliantly.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, well, we could definitely do it. We could definitely reenact the miscontrol. And as regards the flick, I'm not so sure.
We do that 5 times out of 5, I reckon.
Probably so.
And by the way, we might as well mention we do have a copycat video coming tomorrow on Friday, depending on when you're watching this, of us trying to replicate Cian Lynch's chop up between his legs against Cork in the league February 2020. So tune in for that, because yeah, it goes down predictable lines, I'd imagine. I think that's fair to say.
That's a fact, yeah. No, that's a fact, yeah. Just on the 2A games this weekend, Kerry playing Meath. Meath won last week against Wicklow, beat them 20 points to 11. And Pádraig O'Hanrahan and Jack Regan hit 5 each, 4 from frees. But this is kind of a big game for Kerry. Like, their fate is out of their hands now. Not sure if Shane Conway is going to be back. Obviously didn't feature last weekend. Like, the only success from 2A this year for Kerry, having been beaten in a final by a score last year by Antrim, would have been promotion. And there's no final in 2A this year, so it's the top team goes through. So Kerry need to win the remainder of their games, and they need to hope that Offaly are going to mess up.
Like, Offaly are in a great spot here. They're the only team on 4 points after 2 games. Their scoring differential is plus 37. The next team is Carlow plus 9, and everyone is in a minus scoring differential after that. So if Offaly get a win this weekend, which it would be no mean feat in Carlow, it'll be a tough place to go. They're in a great spot.
No, they're in a right good spot, and even like just getting a result, a draw or a win would be huge, just for head-to-heads and things like that. Carlow were obviously beaten by Down last weekend, which was a big. I know they were away and it was up in Ballycran, but still would have still been a big shock. Carlow played Division 1 hurling last year, obviously. Do you know what I mean? So obviously there's a bit of turbulence there in Tom Mullally's first couple of games in charge, and Marty Kavanagh was, I believe, quiet enough last week, and Chris Nolan, while he got 1-3 from play, was relatively quiet too. Those two guys are crucial to their cause, so that's a massive game, Carlow and Offaly. Based on recent form, you'd have to be saying you fancy Offaly, and just with the way that they've played, they're playing quite an open, kind of free-flowing brand, and I'd imagine Carlow will be really trying to get in their faces. Liam Langton is one player in particular that's absolutely flying for Offaly. He got 5 against Meath. I think he got 1-6 last week and was on nearly every team of the week. So he plays around centre forward and roams and seems to kind of drift into a lot of positions free. So I'd say Carlow will be really trying to tie down him. But that's an interesting tie. Hopefully we can keep our fate in our own hands. And then the other 2A tie is Wicklow hosting Down.
Oh, Wicklow badly need a result here.
Down. Yeah, like if you're basically looking, you would have said Wicklow, Meath and Down as potentially the bottom 3 here. So if Wicklow can get a result against Down, then at least they have a potential head-to-head advantage if they're both near the bottom of the table at the end. But Down definitely are in a right good position. Paul Sheehan was very good last weekend. He's the manager's son, Ronan Sheehan's son. He scored 1-9, 7 frees, and Connor Woods was good too. He got 2 goals, one of which was a penalty. So Wicklow are going to have to try and turn things around, managed by Eamon Scallon, obviously, who was famously sent off in the 96 All-Ireland final that Wexford went on to win.
Jeez, you have to bring that up again. That's the last thing he wants to hear.
It's actually 25 years as well this year, so I'm sure he'll be getting lots of various phone calls at different stages throughout the year to do a look back piece. But he has Andy O'Brien back in the attack, which is a big boost for them as well. But then Wicklow need to get a result, which you'd have to be saying probably of those three games, you'd probably be fancying down Offaly and Kerry.
And in Division 2B, Mayo are flying at the top of the table after 2 wins from 2. They'll fancy their chances against Donegal, who have 1 win from 2. Then Kildare are out against Derry in that game as well. What do you reckon here?
Donegal played Mayo in last year's Nicky Rackard final, and Donegal won that game, obviously. But Mayo, it's amazing just even Key Higgins coming back. It's after they play a kind of a possession style that we did last year anyway, from what I saw of them, because they had generally a smaller type player. All of a sudden, Key Higgins is back up full forward. Cathal Freeman's gone from wing back to centre forward, a big, bulky player. And now Shane Boland has kind of been given a bit more freedom in attack, less reliant on him. So all of a sudden, they have a couple of different focal points in attack. I'd probably be favouring, you'd definitely be favouring Mayo there, because Donegal took an absolute pacing from Kildare. Kildare and Derry, you probably would be favouring Kildare. They put up a huge score last weekend. It was 4-29 against Donegal. They have the former Kildare footballer Johnny Byrne scored 1-3 last week, and they have Brian Byrne, Jack Sheridan, James Burke as well. They've lots of Rian Bourne centre back too. They've lots of really, really good players. Paul Divley in midfield, like David Herrity's after. Seems like there's a bit of a feel-good factor around Kildare hurling, and for a Joe McDonagh Cup side to be playing in Division 2B is not really good enough if they're looking at the long-term future of Kildare hurling. They need to be up in 2A, so I'd imagine they'd be really, really pushing for promotion. So probably be favouring Mayo and Kildare in those 2 games. And then there's a full round of 3A fixtures. So you have Longford against Tyrone. Longford suffered a bad defeat to Armagh last week. They were beaten by 12 points, whereas Tyrone beat Monaghan 125 to 213. Damien Casey hit 116. Ex-Antrim dual star CJ McGorty was playing for Tyrone as well. He had 2 points on his debut. That'll be a tight enough game, but you would fancy Tyrone. Sligo against Armagh. Sligo didn't play last weekend, and they're coming up against an Armagh side who had a right good win against Longford. Fintan Donnelly hit 11.6 from play, so you definitely be favouring Armagh there. And I believe you have the inside scoop on Cavan and Louth in the Division 3B tie, because I know Brian Breezer Fitzgerald, who had 13 points last week as Cavan snatched a draw against Fermanagh.
Yeah, his Dalkey accent will be a little bit unusual in the Cavan dressing room, albeit maybe his wife's accent has rubbed off a little bit, although as I often say to her, it's more the other way around. So he's a Coola native. There's a couple of Coola lads that actually play with Cavan. They have the lineage, of course, of the Breffni county, but Breezer, I think he scored the last 4 or 5 points in the game, and he was in goals when we were doing a small-sided game in training then during the week, and I had to abuse him a couple of times for letting in handy goals, and there was expletives involved as well, but it was more so to entertain myself than actually genuinely being wound up by it. But I'd imagine he'll do a bit of scoring at this level, especially a very good free taker. So I'd imagine.
Speaking of expletives, Shane, for anybody who tuned in to the live OurGame show on Monday, I would like to apologise for my misuse of language at the start of the show. I didn't realise we had recorded, and my phone, which I used for video here in front of me, fell, and I used some less than choice words, and there was a couple of people commenting about my French. So I'd like to apologise to any viewers who are offended by my actions. And as Jim Gavin says, we've had an honest and frank discussion, and we're both looking forward to resuming our inter-county careers.
Yeah, without doubt. Yeah, Louth actually beat Cavan last year, and Cavan will be looking to atone for that. And also the final game then is between Fermanagh and Leitrim. Fermanagh unlucky to draw with Cavan last weekend, having gone well ahead, and Sean Corrigan scoring plenty, and Leitrim were narrowly edged out by Louth. So could be a nice, good, tight one. So that's about a height of it for the hurling show, brought to you by Torpy and the new bamboo stick. Use the promo code OurGame, all caps, and you can get 10% off that, and the link is in the video description here. Any final thoughts before we pull in for the day?
No, I just hope some of the negative commentary, which is only natural, I just hope we have a couple of rip-roaring games this weekend. I'd love to see a couple of big games there, be it Kilkenny or Wexford or Tip and Galway, that have 4 or 5 goals in it and are a bit more open. And I'd like to see, hopefully, the free count will go down a small bit as well. But hopefully we'll be talking about all the right things next Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for the hurling show. Thanks very much, Michael Verney. We'll see you all again on Monday.
Cheers, Shane.
The Hurling Show, brought to you in association with Torpy. Torpy are leading hurling into a new future with Bamboo, a revolutionary hurley created using their unique engineered hurling performance know-how. Already being used by many inter-county players, Torpy's Bamboo is highly sustainable, offers players greater striking distance and a more consistent balance every time, without compromising on natural feel. Check them out on the Torpy website and in the link below, and enter the promo code OurGame to get yourself 10% off.